Hey there, and welcome to a new episode of Literature's Next, the set of videos where I make an analysis of a literature masterpiece in roughly 15-20 minutes. Today, we're talking about William Wordsworth and the rise of the Romantic period. So, although Romantic is a term that covers the style that characterized the last years of the 18th century and the first decades of the 19th century, it is a misleading title. They didn't call themselves Romantic. This is a term that was given to them later to distinguish them to the previous tendency, the Classicism. Looking at historical context, three major events allowed the sparkle of a new era to burn. First, the United States Revolution happened in 1776. Second, the French Revolution happened in 1789. And the Industrial Revolution, which started in 1760 in England. The revolutionary tendencies allowed the ideal of freedom to spread among intellectuals, taking distance from the major trend of neoclassicism, where poets were spokesmen of society addressing to a general cultivated public. Romantic poets valued the individual and his freedom of perception. Every single poet is different. He feels differently and celebrates his unique source of poetry. By choosing everyday events as a source of poetry and a language spoken every day as a way to expression, Romantic poetry could do justice to the disadvantaged, people marginalized and forgotten by society, such as rural workers and the poor, with the small details that none of these poems changed the lives of these wretches. The Industrial Revolution broke abruptly the balance between man and nature, so that poets try to re-establish it by finding correspondence in natural surrounding for their introspective working of heart and mind. Romantic poetry has to be spontaneous. It is free from any structural form. The language of feeling can't have any restriction, so that words flow free from the poet's conscience to the pages, respecting no literary standards but the one of their art. A philosophical tendency coming from Germany was embraced by the Romantic poets, who abandoned the old standards of describing reality as it was used to do in neoclassicism, like a mirror. They decided instead to use their own conscience and perception as a lamp, illuminating the surrounding, and see the truth through the lens of their subjective experience. To extend this idea of the lamp illuminating the truth, another vital element to this style is memory. Poets write about things they remember, or glorify both the sensations memory evoke and the power of imagination. That's when ruins from monasteries and castles acquire meaningful poetry. The poet sees them and imagines their aspect and life in the past. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge try to explain all these new ideas about poetry in their preface to the Lyrical Ballads, first published anonymously in 1798. In this text, they explain how poetry can originate from incident situations from common life, and how they have to be described by a selection of language really used by man, that is, everyday language. They also explain how the ideals of beautiful and sublime have to be embraced by poets, where beautiful suggests smallness, clarity, and painless pleasure, and sublime, from Schlegel, suggests the idea of transcendence with the boundlessness of the universe. Beautiful is the mountain, sublime is the blizzard. Differently from German philosophy, Romantics transformed the sublime into a naturalistic key, well expressed in the poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner from Coleridge. If you want more information about The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, remember that I've done a literary snack almost 1 year ago. You can find the link in the description. It is in this marvelous context that the poem I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud was born. The writer is William Wordsworth, born in the Lake District of the northern England in 1770. He lived a life surrounded by beauty and nature while he attended an excellent grammar school and then went to St. John's College in Cambridge. The friendship he had with Coleridge helped him to turn to his real love for nature and to embrace his being different, turning him into one of the most famous romantic poets. The poem that we analyze today is erroneously called Daffodils, and though the poem is a tribute to this flower, it is not the title. Due to the ideal of the romantic poetry had to be an overflow of feeling, it's impossible to crystallize a poem with a title. Therefore, the title is just the first line of the poem, I wandered lonely as a cloud. The poem is a clear attempt to reconstruct that balance with nature that the Industrial Revolution had broken with mechanic labor and pollution. The speaker is walking alone, similar like a solitary cloud, and suddenly he sees a long row of daffodils near the lake. Blown by the breeze, he compares the daffodils with the stars in the sky and indulges in watching them while moving their heads in the wind as if they were dancing. The poet can't help to be cheerful in the company of the daffodils. At the end of the poem, the speaker is alone in his armchair when the memory of that vision comes back to him and fills his mind with joy as he dances with the daffodils.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on higher vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze.
The poem begins by establishing a connection with nature with a simile that opens the path to the later personification of the daffodils. We are already informed that this poem is about the connection with nature. The daffodils make their entrance in lines 3-4. Daffodils are the symbol of spring in Britain. Nouns like crowd and host, a large number, are personification that recalls a group of angels, suggesting a sense of divinity. Once the poet notices the daffodils, they suddenly seem to be all over. Line 6 presents a variation to the meter that recalls the sense of dance of the flowers in the wind.
Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretch a never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance.
The second stanza, same as the first, starts with a simile, comparing the daffodils to the stars. This connection empowers the link between humanity and nature, as we all know how we feel when watching the stars. The word continuous at the beginning of the stanza and the enjambement at the end of line 9 underline the abundance of stars and the daffodils being so many as far as the eye can see. In the last line, the dance of the daffodils is brought through a personification that implies intentions from the daffodils to dance.
The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought.
The third stanza starts again with the theme of dancing, but in this time it's the waves. Using personification of the waves highlights the connection that nature has in everything we see. The happiness in line 15 states the connection between the daffodils and the speaker's happiness. The daffodils seem happy, and they pass this mood to the speaker. The use of the word poet instead of person suggests that to understand and feel this kind of happiness passed from the flowers, the person would need a certain sensibility that only poets have. Line 18 is an interjection that brings us to the present. The poem is in the past tense, so we know that the poet is talking about a past experience. But with this line, we are suggested that the experience acquired even more importance afterwards.
For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils.
That's how we get to the final stanza, that contextualizes the previous 3 stanzas by telling us that the poet is in his living room and is recollecting in memory, and explaining that the importance of this presence was beyond the immediate joy the poem felt that day. In fact, the joy comes back to him when he is pensive, a word that suggests worry. The memory of the daffodils, as memory is an essential theme of Romanticism, comes back to the poet, and he figuratively joins the daffodils in this dancing. Thanks to his imagination, that it is a gift that only poets have. The poem is itself a memory. Wordsworth brings back the experience of the daffodil through this memory and imagination. Imagination is an integral part of Romanticism. The poem shows how, with the imagination, with his inward eye, it's possible to bring back pleasant memories. The poem needs the cooperation of the reader to work, as the poet tries to give life to a memory of his, but the reader needs his inward eye and imagination to feel the experience. The importance of imagination is clear in the last stanza, where imagination is the poet's salvation, a way to detach from the world and its problem. And the whole poem is an attempt to pass this joy and this possibility to salvation to the reader. In his preface to the Lyrical Ballads, a text that nowadays we consider the manifesto of romantic poetry, Wordsworth underlined how poetry should be a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. The original experience with the daffodils is the spontaneous overflow, that it reaches its fullest value in the solitude mentioned at the end of the poem. The process of memory coming back in a form of pure and spiritual experience that soothes the mind emphasizes the importance of imagination for human nature. It has the power to make people feel a union with nature as the poet feels with the daffodils. Memory and imagination fuse together and bring the poet a delicious experience for his soul that only who has the sensibility to perceive, in this case the poet, can appreciate. So, if you thought that romantic poetry was about love, well, I hope I made you reconsider. Romantic poetry is about freedom of the mind, fusion with nature, appreciating how powerless we are in front of nature. The term romantic comes from the Old French romance, that was referred to the language evolved from Latin. In French, roman was the ancestor of a novel. In Middle Age, they were written in verse, mostly a narrated fantastic quest. As a result, the term romantic in the 19th century referred to fanciful and fantastic work with not necessarily all the positive elements. Think of that next time you see a storm, a rough sea raging onto a cliff, or a majestic mountain standing out in a blizzard, or the street where you live turning to red as autumn is coming, or when you see the first daisy reminding you that spring is here. This is what the romantic wanted to celebrate, and it's undeniable that it's a pure human feeling. Something we feel every day, and the knowledge that 200 years ago they were feeling it as well opens up to a scenario that people felt it even before, even thousands of years ago. And this allows us to remember that no matter how much technology, innovation, and even capitalism, or even the COVID-19 pandemic can change the world, we will always remain human, and our imagination will always remain our salvation. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you like it, please give it a thumb up. If you want to see more video about literature, you can subscribe. And remember that this is our Facebook page, this is our Instagram page, this is our email address. We are a language school. We teach English, French, German, Italian for foreigners, and Spanish. We teach adults as well as teenagers. We deliver lessons online or even in present. Thank you very much for staying with us, and I hope to see you soon with another Literature Snacks or a historical sparkle. Bye bye!